Part 2 on the reason that you should never minimalize exactly how important, how impactful, and how meaningful an individual's collection is to them. Alright? As far as their collectibles. Understand, I mentioned the preservation factor. Like when I mentioned about comic books, I mentioned how difficult it was for the country as a whole to be able to even preserve comic books that dated back to the point of World War II. Because at the point of the Great Depression, in World War II, when, there were enumerated amount of resources that ended up having to be used towards munitions in order to be able to defend the country. All right. There was a lot of sacrifices that needed to be made by the individuals of the country, all right? The citizens. So, when there was even a lack of paper to be able to go ahead and be able to wrap gifts, whether it be homemade gifts or whether it be whatever cheap trinkets were capable of being able to be obtained, you know, because having to put a massive amount of work in for whatever little tangible physical souvenir from the time to be able to give to a loved one to say, hey, times may be hard, but you have not been disregarded. You have still been thought of enough. That this right here is symbolic of my blood, sweat, and tears and hard work that I had to put in to be able to even get you and give you this little bit. Paper from comic books ended up going ahead and being used to improvise wrapping paper, or as tissue paper, in gift bags. So, preservation of comics from that point in time is already difficult enough to be able to find. It is literally a relic of history. Alright? Now, when it comes down to the baseball cards, alright? Dating back to the 50s. To you, the individual that's being like, oh, you're being a man child, like, why can't you grow up? Like, alright, understand, those cards, you may have seen them as cards, but every card had a story behind it, just like every picture that you have of your childhood has a story for you. So, the obtaining of such card from this, series and collection, I ended up going ahead and trading with this individual that ultimately, we were friends from this point of time to this point in time. And that right there was the point in time where things were right. Back at a point in time before I got to know how fucked up the world really is. Before I got to know exactly how demented and how truly fucking callous and evil and depraved that people can get when their own selfishness and just self-indulgence end up coming into play. Alright? And with the Pokemon cards, that right there was symbolic of something that was introduced into my life at a point in time right before I had ended up getting to know the depths of abuse that somebody could end up being put through and having to endure. And ultimately, memories that ended up getting made just switching, trading with people, and, getting to have our little miniature swap meets. Where during that point in time, because of the factor that I wasn't alone with my abusers, I got to know miniature times of peace. Not to mention that, but not every individual that, I would go ahead and collect Pokemon cards with is still alive anymore. So while you see them as little mementos from what should be a passing trend, I see that as a little relic of something that's left behind from an individual who no longer walks this planet. Alright? That sentimental factor. That is what you're trying to strip away from the individual. That right there is exactly what you're trying to whip away from that person. You are literally saying, I could give a fuck less about the memory of that individual or the way that those little moments that you guys were engaging in your hobby actually ended up meaning to you, regardless of the factor that it ended up being a tiny breath of peace, a little moment that you weren't getting the ever-loving shit beat out of you, or getting forcibly placed with a family that you never knew, and you didn't know if you were going to end up being sent back to, or ultimately if you were going to end up having new broken bones, or new bruises, or getting smacked around, or being used for fucking child labor. I don't think you understand exactly how impactful and meaningful that really is for somebody that has been through and endured so much that ultimately they never knew if they would be able to ever view the world with any type of optimism ever again. So before you ever call somebody a man child or a woman child for going ahead and collecting, for engaging in a hobby, something that they literally hold so close to them that when they ended up having their own kids, not only were they going to be able to show them the collection, but they were going to point out the memory of how they got specific said piece of said collection to be able to share with the next generation, to be able to pass on. Just remember, you went to go call them a man-child. You went to go ahead and discourage them from having anything that ended up just remotely reminding them of a time when they viewed a world through a lens that peace was possible. That's what you're trying to rip away from them. And if they view it as you trying to rip away any type of hope and peace that they ever had, by going ahead and trying to take away that nostalgia, understand if they go scorched earth, you fucking deserve it.